art is politics. Art is the way that we express our innate feelings about the world. My name is Christeen. I'm a photographer that lives in the city of Oshawa. I'm 30, recently turned, and I've been doing photography actually since I was 7. When I was a little girl, my father gave me a camera, probably at about my 6th or 7th birthday, and it was an old, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but I think it was called a Yakashima or something like that. I no longer have this camera, but it was a black and white film camera, and being the child of an alcoholic, I actually used this camera to process my life's experiences. And as I grew, photography became my way to process my world. In terms of the things that I'm drawn to with my photography, I'm drawn to the desolate, lonely, open spaces. I'm an agoraphobe, which means that I actually don't like busyness. I don't really like to be around people. I don't feel safe around too much busyness and noise. So I'm drawn to places like abandoned factories and old churches and things like that where, you know, people once were, but are no longer, because it feels more like home to me. I'm comfortable there with more the memory of people than the actual people themselves. The places that are featured in my artworks are places that I could spend all day in. Those are places where I've actually taken other people, and it has been actually refreshing versus being sort of oppressing. And it's different, and I want to show people that some things that may seem desolate and empty and scary actually are very beautiful. In my adolescence, my late adolescence, I actually moved into a shelter in Toronto, and I was living with a girlfriend named Destiny at that time in the old, it's the Brickworks factory. It's now actually, I believe, some kind of farm, like urban farm or something like that. But when we lived there, it was a health hazard full of brick dust, and we were homeless. And I actually still have a lot of the photos that I took at that time. And some of those photos are still you know, on my online portfolio and whatnot. And those photos I've actually shown to counselors and other people to give sort of that perspective that, you know, people who are homeless and whatnot, it could be anybody. When you look at me now, I don't look like your typical homeless person, but I mean, we slept amongst brick dust and partied and did all these other things that, you know, people shame each other for doing, but I had to grow, and that took a long time, and part of my healing was my photography. I started actually speaking to other artists and doing exhibitions. I was in, it's called Pancakes and Booze. It's an exhibition in Toronto, and that was one of my first ever exhibitions. I did a photo series there featuring one of the expropriated properties that the Crown had expropriated to build the 407, and I used that in the context to discuss forced homelessness. In this case, the couple that were living in this property, they'd been living there for 40 years, and the Crown pushed them out. They actually later passed away because they had nowhere to live. And so in that way, I do think that art is a powerful way to sort of forward my activism, because it gives that visual impact where words sometimes fail. When I was 18 or so, I was living in a shelter in Toronto. It was called Massey Center. It was a shelter for teen moms. I had been gifted a Canon digital camera, which was powered by batteries. And being on Ontario Works at that time, I didn't have the funding to just go and buy new batteries whenever I wanted. So I would exchange photo shoots with the other teen moms of their children in exchange for batteries. It was a way for them to get pictures of their kids when they couldn't afford, you know, to go to Walmart or Sears or something. And I was able to practice. So I started to read things online. You know, I learned about the rule of thirds. I started to read more about, you know, exposure and all that sort of stuff. And here I am today. Now I use I wish I had a red line Canon. I don't have that, but you know, I just use what I have. I feel that a beautiful photo isn't necessarily taken on, doesn't have to be taken on the best, you know, equipment. It's what the photo is of and what it represents, I think, is the important thing. Art kind of saved my life, to be honest with you. Living in the shelter that I was living in was very stressful. It was cockroach infested. At that time, it was also the Toronto garbage strike. This is many moons ago. So they weren't picking up garbage. It was filth laden. And I started to take pictures of my surroundings. People didn't believe me when I would tell them that it was this bad and that, I was living in these places. And the photos actually helped me prove my cause. So I would go around and I would speak to people about the things that were happening. And along the way, people would also say, hey, this is a really nice photo. And it became kind of a powerful talking point because yes, this is a really beautiful photo. Did you know I used to sleep here? And it brought things into context for people where it hadn't been. At that time, I was actually going to U of T. I was in the bridging program there, and I was involved in the Mature Students Association. And a lot of the people that were, my fellow students, they didn't realize that I was this sort of homeless person and what was going on, because homelessness doesn't always have a look. It doesn't have a face. At the end of the day, it helped me to shed light on issues where no light had been shone. When I started doing the work that I'm doing now with Dyer, the photos that I started taking and showing to City Council, that was the thing that was the compelling point that started to get things moving. When I do reports for the city and whatnot around the issues of homelessness, I do a lot of research and whatnot around that sort of thing. I include images that I've taken of, say, local tent cities and whatnot to help forward that visual impact, because it creates more meaning. It creates a connection with the viewer that sometimes I can't convey by just words alone. So it's one thing for me to say to a city councilman, there's such and such issues going on in this area, but it's a whole other thing when I start to show visual photos. It propels people to action in a way that just speaking sometimes can't. I submitted, preliminary reports and spread my message as far as I could, but at the end of the day, it was the photos that got the work done, and that's healing still at age 30, 12 years later. And I can't see that ever changing. It's a way for me to express myself, to heal my community. It's a way for me to heal myself, because I'm able to confront aspects of my previous life that hurt. It's a way for me to show people that they're not alone. It's a way for me to eventually share with my children my story. And that's every way to heal. There's, it's a lovely thing.